My first love begged me to marry his rival, the ruthless crown prince, just to save my sister. Betrayed by my father and sold for power, I entered the lion's den expecting a death sentence. But as the veil lifted, the cold-blooded tyrant whispered a secret. He had been hunting for me for 10 years. I wasn't his captive. I was his obsession. This was the 12th time James Liu had come to my home with a marriage proposal. The 12th time he had come to propose to my legitimate elder sister. When James Liu arrived, he sat straight-backed on his horse, brimming with youthful pride. And when he looked at my sister, his eyes held nothing but tenderness and longing. In the past, whenever he came to propose, father would dismiss him with a few offhand words. But things were different now. James Liu had become the newly crowned top scholar. First in the palace exam, a true disciple of the Son of Heaven. The first thing he did after receiving his honors was come to our home, swear before heaven, and vow to marry my sister as his primary wife, with bridal gifts stretching 10 li. In storybooks, daughters of great households always looked down on scholars from humble origins. But my sister was different. She truly liked James Liu. Once, I secretly saw them under the moonlight, speaking from the heart. By then, they'd known each other for half a year. And I had been secretly in love with James Liu for 5 years. When two hearts are aligned, there is no such thing as who came first. Father refused to let my sister marry down to James Liu. Even if James Liu was now the top scholar, my sister was the legitimate daughter of the Yunhui general. Father held 200,000 troops on the northern frontier. Even imperial princes had to show him respect. Of course, he looked down on a top scholar with no backing. In father's words, my sister should one day become the most noble woman in the world. He wanted her to be the future empress, but my sister had set her mind on marrying her Lulang, Jamie. After father had James Liu thrown out, my sister knelt in the ancestral shrine. For 2 days and 2 nights she neither ate nor drank. Father was furious, but he had no choice. In the end, he sent me to bring her food. I prepared her favorite jujube paste cloud cakes. She couldn't swallow a single bite. She only clutched my hand and said that if she could not repay James Liu's devotion, she would rather kneel in the shrine until death proved her resolve. I repeated her words to father. He sat alone in his study all afternoon. In the end, he agreed to James Liu's proposal. The glory of the Zhang family mattered, but not more than the daughter he loved most. When my sister heard the news, she wept with joy. She hugged me and said, "Emmy, you have no idea how happy I am." I patted her back and told her to rest. In just 2 days, she had grown noticeably thinner. From the moment my sister knelt in the shrine, I knew it would end with father giving in. My sister's mother had been father's first wife. After giving birth, she was left drained of blood and strength, and she died within days. For my sister, father always kept the softest place in his heart. Compared to his daughter's life, even the exalted position of empress no longer seemed so important. As for me, I was the result of father's drunken lapse. My mother was a musician in the general's residence. After she became pregnant with me, she was taken in as a concubine. My sister's name was Sophia Jiang, the brightest pearl in the entire general's residence. My name was Emma Zhang, a name father chose in haste while he was still drowning in grief for his first wife. Fine jade should be flawless. In the end, I was not that piece of jade. My sister and I were close in age. Father didn't truly care for my mother. He simply kept her in the residence. Naturally, he didn't pay much attention to me either. But my sister treated me well, and because of her, no one dared to look down on me openly. After his first wife died, father had no lingering attachments. He threw himself into court affairs. Over the years, the vast general's residence had only 2 daughters, my sister and me. Not even a son to carry on the family line. So to father, my sister becoming empress was the only way to keep the Jiang family prosperous forever. Now that he had agreed to James Liu's proposal, my sister was radiant. Father was unwilling, but he still began preparing her dowry. Rare treasures and land deeds flowed into my sister's rooms like water. The spectacle only stopped 2 days later, when the crown prince himself came to our door. While the crown prince discussed matters with father in the front hall, I sat with my sister, embroidering a handkerchief with mandarin ducks. I'd only finished half of one duck when father suddenly sent someone to summon me to the study as well. When I entered, the crown prince was gone. In his place sat James Liu, who had rushed over. James Liu sat to one side, his face dark. One hand gripped a teacup so tightly that the veins stood out on the back of it. When he saw me, he gave only a perfunctory nod, none of his usual composure in it. I bowed to father and asked what had happened. Their expressions were both strange. No one answered me. After a long silence, James Liu finally set the teacup down, stood, and told father, voice firm, that if he could not marry my sister, he would rather never marry at all. Father flared too. He raised his voice and demanded, "Is Emmy not my daughter?" "Emma has always been like a younger sister to me," James Liu said. My heart turned to ice. Looking at James Liu, jaw clenched tight, I suddenly understood. Father wanted me to take my sister's place and marry James Liu. The confrontation ended badly. James Liu swept his sleeve and left. Only father and I remained. Father sat in his chair, his back bent in a way I rarely saw. "The crown prince came earlier," he said. "He was here to seek the hand of the Jiang family's legitimate daughter." The crown prince of the Eastern Palace seeking the general's legitimate daughter. If this were a storybook, it would be a match praised for 100 generations. Father wanted me to marry James Liu in my sister's place. If James Liu agreed, my sister would have no choice but to give up. Then she could marry into the crown prince's residence with all the glory and splendor father desired. But even with father's threats and promises, even with my years of friendship with James Liu, none of it could outweigh the heart he had already given entirely to my sister. Father sighed and went on. The matter of the crown prince marrying a Jiang daughter had already been decided in the palace. Now James Liu refused, and my sister would refuse as well. That left only one option. I would take my sister's place and marry into the crown prince's residence. But I was only the daughter of a concubine. Father said that if I agreed to marry the crown prince, he would elevate my mother to be his primary wife. She would be entered into the ancestral shrine and enjoy wealth and honor, and I would become a proper legitimate second daughter of the Yunhui general's household. I stared at father in shock and asked what would happen if I refused. His gaze was sharp, like fire, as though demanding to know why I would refuse. "You are a daughter of the Zhang family. If the crown prince had never come, father might have found me a good match and let me live out my life in the capital in peace. But the crown prince had come anyway. Father told me to go back and think it through. On the surface, it was my choice, but no matter how long I thought, I couldn't find any other path. I left the study in a daze. Halfway back, I ran into James Liu. He said he'd been waiting for me. He said there truly was no other way. He could only beg me. He said Sophie was frail and couldn't withstand such a blow. He said he wanted to ask me to marry the crown prince. My father and James Liu, both for my sister's sake, had come up with the same solution. I still remembered when I was 11 and fell gravely ill. Father sent me back to our old home in Huaining to recover. That was where I met 14-year-old James Liu. My face was covered in red rashes then. Other children treated me like a monster. Only James Liu offered me a dove to cheer me up. That day, he smiled so gently I plunged headfirst into it, and I've never found my way out. All these years, James Liu had never asked anything of me. Now, the first time he begged, it was for this. We faced each other in silence. After a long while, my throat went dry. I dodged past him without a word and hurried back to my room. My sister was still waiting inside. When she saw me, she lifted a handkerchief and told me to look at the mandarin duck she'd embroidered. She said she could never get the tail right and asked me how to fix it. I took the handkerchief and glanced at it twice. A tear dropped hard onto the fabric, blooming into a dark stain. My sister sprang up and gripped my shoulders. "What's wrong?" I shook my head gently. "Sophie, if you marry James Liu, will you be happy?" I leaned against her shoulder, just like when we were little. "Happy, of course I'll be happy." At the sound of James Liu's name, her brows and eyes curved with joy. "Then that's enough. If you're happy, I'll be happy for you." I told father I was willing to marry the crown prince. My wedding date was set half a month earlier than my sister's. The day it was decided, my sister stormed into my room and demanded to know if father had forced me. I was combing my hair. With each stroke, my dark hair slid smoothly through the comb to the ends. "No," I agreed myself. "I like the crown prince." I set the comb on the vanity and pulled my sister to sit by the table. "What? Are you gonna miss me so much you can't bear to let me marry?" She tapped my nose and scolded me for being shameless. We talked deep into the night. She told me everything: what kind of person the Crown Prince was, his habits, what I would have to face after entering the Crown Prince's residence, and all the rules. She asked when I'd started liking the Crown Prince. I thought for a long time and realized that, all these years, I'd seen him only a handful of times. She waited for my answer. In the end, after struggling to say anything at all, I claimed it was at last year's polo match. I had attended that match. It was also the closest I had ever been to him. We laughed and talked all night. Near dawn, I finally lay down and drifted to sleep. Not long after that long talk with my sister, I sat in the bridal sedan and was carried to the Crown Prince's residence. My mother had been a concubine for many years. She had accompanied father for more than a decade. The day before I married, she was elevated to primary wife at last. For the first time, she could hold her head high. And I married Alexander Han, becoming the Crown Prince's secondary consort. By rights, the Jiang family's legitimate daughter was worthy to be Crown Princess. But my mother was only a second wife, and I had only just gained the name of legitimate daughter. Making me a secondary consort was the most fitting arrangement. The wedding procession moved to the blare of music. Behind it came the dowry father prepared for me. He did not care much for me, but he had never been stingy with me. A matchmaker helped me enter through the side gate of the Crown Prince's residence. There were few consorts inside, and since there was no Crown Princess, I didn't even need to perform the tea ceremony. I was sent straight to the bridal chamber. I had once imagined that my husband would marry me with full rights, that we would bow to heaven and earth, then pay respects to our parents. Fate had other plans. I never got my wish. Following the rules I'd learned before the wedding, I sat properly at the edge of the bed beneath my red veil. With my eyes lowered, I could see only the round fan in my hands and my festive robe, embroidered with intricate patterns. I'd heard that because of father and the Crown Prince, many guests had come, mostly important figures at court. I sat in the bridal chamber for what felt like ages. The matchmaker and the maids stood watch beside me, each one perfectly proper. Not a sound. Only long after night fell did I hear the door open, followed by greetings, then footsteps withdrawing. The door closed again. Someone approached, step by step. Boots struck the stone floor and my heart thudded along with them. A pair of boots embroidered with auspicious cloud patterns in gold thread stopped before me. Their owner lifted a hand and raised my red veil. My palms were slick with sweat. I quickly raised the round fan to cover my face. The old nurse who taught me the rules called it modesty. "Are you hungry?" The Crown Prince didn't hurry to lower my fan. Instead, he asked softly if I was hungry. I had never spoken to him before. I'd always assumed his voice would be full of arrogance. But his voice was gentle, like a deep, quiet spring. I shook my head. He took the fan from my hands and reached out with the other. In his palm were several pastries laid on a silk handkerchief. He brought them from the main hall. "I heard a bride has to follow rules all day and barely gets to eat," he said. "So I brought you some." He sat beside me and offered the pastries again. My stomach truly was empty. It had growled who knew how many times. Yet looking at the food, I forced a smile and insisted I wasn't hungry. Father had said that once I married into the Crown Prince's residence, I had to keep the rules 1,000 times more strictly than at home. "I'll attend to you for bed," I said. I stood and bowed, then started to crouch and remove his boots. Before I could, he caught my arm and steadied me. At the same time, he pressed a piece of pastry to my lips. The sweetness of peanuts and red dates hit me so suddenly I didn't even have time to react. I looked up at him, stunned. In the glow and shadow of the red candles, a smile tugged at his handsome face, one he couldn't quite hide. "I brought them, so why not eat a couple?" Under his gaze, I ate every last piece. My mother used to say that no matter how grand the household, once you became someone's concubine, you were only a servant with a better-sounding title. So after I agreed to marry into the Crown Prince's residence, I prepared myself to serve him. Yet he seemed to have no need of my service at all. He even wiped the crumbs from the corner of my mouth. He said he was tired. He also said he had to attend morning court tomorrow, so he should sleep early. All the rules I'd learned vanished the moment he leaned close and sealed my lips with his. Behind the bed curtains, as we breathed and moved together, fear made me clench my hands into fists. My nails bit into my palms just to keep myself clear-headed. "Are you very afraid of me?" he asked against my ear, suddenly stopping. I started. "If you're afraid, I won't force you." I lay stiff, staring at the patterns on the bed curtains. He only tugged the quilt and lay down beside me. I wondered if I'd angered him. I turned my head in secret to look. His eyes were closed. I couldn't read his mood. I clutched the quilt, unsure whether to feel relieved or more afraid. "In the future, don't call yourself your concubine. You should have been my wife." On my wedding night, we did not consummate the marriage. He didn't get angry. He even said I was his wife. Because of that, I lay awake all night with my eyes closed, unable to sleep. At dawn, I finally dozed for a short while. When I woke again, he was gone, and the place where he'd slept was already cold. I hurried out of bed and asked the maid who came to help me wash and dress what time it was. Head lowered, she said it was already late morning. Before long, the crown prince would return from court, and I had only just risen. I sat at the vanity while the maid calmly arranged my hair. Seeing how uneasy I was, she tried to reassure me. The crown prince had instructed them to let me sleep longer. Only after I woke was anyone to come and greet me. Greet me? I stared at my reflection in the bronze mirror, full of questions. I was only a secondary consort. I wasn't qualified to accompany him into the palace for formal rites. Yet having others come to pay respects to a mere secondary consort, what kind of rule was that? No matter whose rule it was, they came. Most of the women in the inner residence were daughters of official families. Even without proper titles, once they entered the crown prince's residence, they wouldn't be without benefit when he ascended the throne. By that measure, I, a secondary consort, had become the woman with the most legitimate standing in the entire inner residence. From the main seat, I looked them over. 5 women had come in all. The maid said another had fallen ill yesterday and couldn't attend. I received them, had the maids distribute the prepared gifts, and smiled through their flattery until my face nearly went stiff. Only then did the greetings finally end. I rubbed my aching neck. Matching faces to names in my mind, I finally understood that the one who hadn't come lived in pristine court. She was the 3rd young lady of the ministry household, and she'd entered the residence 7 months before I did. After I finally finished dealing with that, I hadn't even had time to sit and catch my breath when the crown prince returned. His attendant reported that flooding had broken out in Jabay. So the moment the crown prince arrived, he went straight to his study to consult with his advisors. I ate lunch alone. He was even busier than I'd imagined. The maid said that before I married in, he had nearly not set foot in the inner residence for a month. He was either in his study or summoned into the palace. With nothing to do in the courtyard, I stayed inside and copied characters. I'd filled several sheets and was completely absorbed when a man's voice suddenly sounded at the door. "Staying in the residence all day, do you feel stifled?" It was the crown prince. I hurriedly set down my brush and went to bow. He seemed in a good mood, but when he picked up my practice sheets, his expression turned hard to describe. My handwriting had always been ugly. After all these years, it was only barely passable. "My writing is truly unsightly," I said, embarrassed, nearly twisting my handkerchief to pieces. "I've made you laugh." "I told you yesterday not to call yourself that," he said. His eyes remained on the paper, his voice even. "If you've married me, then from now on, we are one." He said it so naturally it left me dazed. I wanted to tell him that one was meant for a primary wife, but under his calm, serious gaze, the words stuck in my throat. I could only stand there in silence as he flipped through the pages. When he reached the character for Emmy, my name, he asked, all at once, whether I had a courtesy name. I shook my head and told him I didn't. Father had risen from the ranks. Though he now stood at the peak of power, he never cared about small matters like a girl's courtesy name. "Then I'll give you one. How about it?" He was my husband. There was nothing improper about him giving me a courtesy name. I nodded. He told me to come closer, took my hand, and wrote 2 characters on the paper. Una. His handwriting was square and upright, each stroke strong with backbone. He said he hoped that after I married him, I could live freely and happily. The warmth of his palm made my hand twitch. A heavy blot of ink spread across the paper. I tilted my head slightly and studied his brows and eyes. My heart skipped. I'd seen him speak with others. Then, he always called himself I, the crown prince of the Eastern Palace, heir to the realm. But with me, he never did. For a moment, he felt like an ordinary man, simply my husband. I pinched myself in secret and forced those strange thoughts down. After that, he called me Yuna and nothing else. He was busy with state affairs. On my third day in the residence, he handed all household matters to me. I feared I would fail, but he told me to carry myself with authority. Whatever happened, he said, he would back me. His attitude left me unsettled. I couldn't tell whether he valued my father's power or whether he truly meant to offer me his heart. Still, what the maid said was true. He rarely entered the inner residence. Sometimes, for several days at a stretch, he slept in the study. The flooding in Jubei grew worse. I heard the official sent to oversee relief was from the Crown Prince's faction. But before he even reached Jubei, someone impeached him, claiming his younger brother had seized farmland outside the capital and caused deaths. The memorial reached the imperial desk. To act so recklessly under the emperor's eyes, to cause a death case and still try to hide it, His Majesty was enraged. Even the Crown Prince was reprimanded and made to kneel in diligent hall for a full half-hour. I couldn't help with court affairs. All I could do was manage the inner residence with full focus. Luckily, no one caused trouble. Those who had entered earlier had long since realized the Crown Prince had no interest in boudoir rivalries. Each had her own way of passing the days. But there was one person I still hadn't met. Olivia Pye, the third young lady of the minister's household, Minister Pei's only daughter, truly the jewel in his palm. They'd said earlier that she was ill. But this illness had lasted more than 10 days. I'd sent medicine more than once, yet she never seemed to recover. I truly thought she was ill. I never expected to run into her outside the Crown Prince's study. The Crown Prince had been kneeling in the palace for over half an hour. I had the small kitchen stew some soup, planning to bring it to him. But right at the study door, I walked straight into Olivia Pei. If the maid hadn't prompted me, I wouldn't have recognized her. Her face was like peach blossoms, bright as the moon. She was the very one who had been claiming sickness all this time. She was carrying a soup jar, too. It seemed she'd come to see the Crown Prince as well, and she'd arrived a little earlier than I had. We faced each other. She only glanced at me, gave a perfunctory curtsy, and looked away. She stood on the left, I stood on the right. We waited a long time. Only after the Crown Prince's advisors finally left the study did a servant come out and take both of our soup jars away. So the Crown Prince didn't want to see anyone? The moment the jars were taken, Olivia reacted faster than I did. She told the servant to attend to the Crown Prince properly, then turned and left. In the end, the servant bowed and told me that the Crown Prince's study never allowed female family members inside. Only then did I understand, and I returned to my own courtyard. I had thought the Crown Prince would sleep alone again tonight. I didn't expect him to come to my room instead. As always, he put out the lamp, and we lay down together and fell asleep in peace. I listened to his steady breathing. Just as I was drifting off, half asleep, I suddenly heard him say, "Today's soup was very good." Then he took my hand and gave it a light pat. The next day, as I was going over the household account books, the wedding invitation for my older sister and James Liu was delivered to the Crown Prince's residence. I had prepared the gift long ago. I'd known the news for a long time too. But when I saw those two names written in gold leaf on the bright red invitation, a strange sense of unreality still rose in me. The night before my sister's wedding, I returned to the Jiang household first to help her dress. The Jiang family had only 2 daughters, her and me. Now that we were both married off, the one who would suffer most was father. I took a sandalwood comb and ran it through my sister's soft black hair. My sister had always been open and unrestrained, yet now a rare shyness drifted across her face. In a low voice, she asked whether the Crown Prince treated me well. I said yes. He treated me extremely well. He was busy, but he always kept me in mind. He often brought me clever little trinkets. 2 days ago, when he finally had time, he even took me to a riding ground outside the city to clear my head. She lowered her voice even more and asked whether the private matters the nanny had taught me were real. I froze. My sister took it for embarrassment, but the truth was, I didn't know anything of what the nanny had described. The Crown Prince worried I might be afraid. Other than our wedding night, whenever he came to my room, the closest he ever got was simply holding my shoulder as we slept. The next day, my sister married. Father emptied out half the general's residence, preparing a dowry that stretched for dozens of lei, and sent his jade-like Sophie out as a bride. James Liu came in person to fetch her. The procession was loud and festive. My male cousins blocked the gate, and James Liu sparred with them for a long time before he was finally allowed in to take my sister away. As he passed by me, James Liu suddenly halted and said, "Thank you for making this happen." I lowered my eyes, stepped aside, and didn't answer. I had once wondered whether James Liu understood my feelings. But in the end, I realized it didn't matter. Whether he understood or not, his heart was already full of my sister, with no room left for anyone else. People have to look forward. There's no point talking about letting someone have their happiness. When my sister stepped into the bridal sedan, I stood beside father and watched his eyes redden in secret, and my mother finally stopped keeping her head down. She found a bit of backbone and began helping receive the guests. The Crown Prince did not come in person, but he sent especially generous gifts. And it wasn't only the Crown Prince. Someone from the third prince also delivered congratulations. The scale and spectacle were no less than those of the Crown Prince's residence. Mother said it meant father was valued at court. I knew father had always been a general who commanded awe, but I also knew the third prince had always coveted the position of Crown Prince. Father accepted gifts from every quarter. For this wedding, more than half the capital was swept up in celebration. Even after I returned to the Crown Prince's residence, I could still faintly hear the drums and music. Tonight, the Crown Prince didn't stay in the study until midnight. Instead, he came to my room to paint. The Empress's skill in painting had long been famed. Like mother, like son, his brushwork was exquisite too. He painted red plum blossoms in the snow, defying the cold, braving the frost, their bones like jade, their spirit like ice. I stood beside him and ground ink. When one stroke of cinnabar fell, the plum blossoms on the paper seemed to take on a soul. I heard my third brother sent wedding gifts to the general's residence today as well. He spoke, but his brush never paused. He did. My hand slowed on the inkstone. I told him, item by item, what I'd seen on the third prince's gift register. I only asked in passing, "You don't need to trouble yourself over such trifles." The Crown Prince's lips held a refined smile. When the final stroke fell, he set the brush on the rack. On the swan paper, the plum blossoms bloomed against snow beside a palace wall. Calling it lifelike was no exaggeration. He hung the painting in my room. He said that when winter came, he would take me to the blossom garden in the palace, where the plum blossoms bloomed most abundantly. "Yuna, have you ever been inside the palace?" "I have, but it was years ago. That year, I had just been brought back to the capital. On the Lantern Festival, the emperor held a banquet for the officials. Father had meant to take my sister, but she caught a chill, so she begged him to bring me instead. It was my first time in the palace, and my only time. Everything felt new. Father noticed how I kept looking around, so he quietly told me that if I got drunk, I should ask a palace maid to take me out to sober up. On Lantern Festival night, the whole city was lit with fireworks, and you could see them from the palace too. I walked through the snow without realizing how far I'd gone, and I got separated from the maid guiding me. In the end, on a narrow palace passage, I met a young eunuch. I helped him out of trouble, and he pointed me the right way, so I returned to father without incident. The Crown Prince promised to take me into the palace to view plum blossoms. But I didn't make it to winter. An imperial decree confined him to the residence. Nearly half the matters he had been overseeing were reassigned to the third prince. It was still that disaster relief mess in Jubei. The official sent for relief not only had a wastrel of a younger brother, but during the relief journey he drank and visited courtesans with the officials along the way, nearly delaying a major undertaking. This time, the emperor was truly furious. He issued a decree confining the crown prince for half a month, charging him with poor judgment and nepotism. Even the empress was reprimanded for failing to teach her son properly, and she requested permission to remove her hairpin and copy scriptures in penitence. The crown prince visibly sank into gloom. The advisors came and went from the study again and again, with no result. In the end, the crown prince smashed an inkstone and drove everyone out. This time, Olivia Pye went into the crown prince's study. I didn't know what she said to him, but the next day Minister Pei submitted a memorial recommending James Liu to take over the disaster relief again. James Liu was my brother-in-law now. With me married to the crown prince, he and the crown prince were connected by marriage as well. Replacing an old subordinate who was useless with a rising new official who had family ties, no matter how you looked at it, it benefited the crown prince. Compared to Olivia Pei, she truly outdid me by far. But what I never expected was that such a profitable opportunity, one that could cultivate new allies and win favor with the emperor, the third prince did not even fight Minister Pei for. He simply went along with it and accepted James Liu. While the crown prince was still confined, James Liu left the capital for Jibei. My sister was bored staying alone at the Liu household, so she often asked me to come keep her company. When we were together, we did nothing more than embroider sachets and talk about whatever amusing news was going around the capital. My sister embroidered a pair of mandarin ducks playing in water on her sachet. The fragrance inside was distinctive too. I asked whether it was some new popular incense in the capital, but she told me she didn't know either. James gave this to me before. I've never even seen it anywhere else. But it works wonderfully for calming the mind and helping you sleep. If you like it, I'll give you some. I went to visit my sister and ended up bringing back half a box of incense. I wanted to make a new sachet for the crown prince. Lately, he never slept soundly, and there were dark shadows under his eyes. As I sewed, the crown prince sat nearby reading. He said he used to be too busy, but now that he was confined, he finally had time to keep me company. Whenever the topic turned to the confinement, he always thought of the empress. His words carried a trace of pain and self-mockery. Father has never liked me. As long as I can remember, I've lost count of how many times Mother was scolded by him over trivial things. Father favors consort Jin. He rarely even sets foot in Mother's palace. These years, even though I'm the crown prince, I've always been cautious, always on guard. Mother has been walking on thin ice in the palace. I never thought that now, separated like this, I'd be the one to drag her down. The book was clenched in his hand, its pages looking slightly yellow under the flickering candlelight. Consort Jin was the third prince's birth mother, the emperor's favored consort. Because of her, the emperor's love for the third prince was the love of a doting father. These years, though the third prince was not born to the main wife, he was deeply favored. He never fell behind others, and he could even contend with the crown prince at court. Naturally, it all depended on the emperor's bias. You're the empress's own flesh and blood. She won't blame you. And since you're confined, you must take even better care of yourself. I finished the sachet and took out the incense my sister had given me, ready to put some inside. The scent was light and elegant, yet it carried. The moment you breathed it in, your mind quieted. Even the crown prince noticed it. Is this new incense from the residence? No. My sister gave it to me today. She's been frail since childhood and often can't sleep well. She said this incense calms the mind and helps with sleep, so she gave me half a box. I sat at the table working on the sachet. The crown prince set down his book and walked over. He picked up a grain of incense, held it beneath his nose, and said evenly, "This is foreign incense. It's called white gum incense. The process is complicated. Only a few boxes are offered as tribute each year. After it enters the palace, it's usually bestowed on the empress and the consorts." The white gum incense still lay before me, but my heartbeat suddenly thundered. There was only one consort in the palace. James Liu was an outside official and couldn't enter the palace. The crown prince's residence had no white gum incense. So where had his come from? I gripped the sachet in my hand. The incense inside crushed, and a sharp burst of fragrance flooded my nose. No wonder. No wonder the third prince hadn't said a word when James Liu went to oversee disaster relief. But if James Liu had truly pledged himself to the third prince in secret, if he meant to scheme against the Jiang family, then what about my sister? What about my father? What about the Yunhui general's residence, with 200,000 troops, always standing between factions without leaning to either side? The crown prince sat across from me and gently took the sachet from my clenched hand. My hand was empty, and my heart seemed to hang in mid-air with it. He turned the sachet over between his fingers. The white gum incense gave off its fragrance, heady and direct. Yuna, if one day I end up at odds with James Liu, who would you help? What do you mean? I twisted the hem of my skirt, my breathing quickening. I only want to know, in your heart, who matters more, me or James Liu? His gaze was still gentle, yet it left me feeling as though I had nowhere to hide. He seemed to know I had once loved James Liu. I couldn't understand how. Under his questioning, my thoughts tangled into a knot. After a long silence, I answered, "You're my husband. If that day really comes, I will help you. But my sister is innocent. And if it comes to that between me and the Jiang family?" Outside, a night wind swept through the bamboo grove, raising a chorus of rustling. Between the crown prince and James Liu, I had no choice. But between the crown prince and the Jiang family, I couldn't choose. So I fell silent. Even the hand clutching my clothes went rigid and clumsy. I'm guessing that if that day truly comes, you won't help either side. If you can't have both, then no matter who loses, you won't survive alone. Daughters of great families. How many of them can live as they please from the day they're born? He was right. Every word struck straight into my heart. So whether it's James Liu or the Jiang family, I won't let you face that kind of impossible choice. The crown prince leaned forward slightly. He lifted one hand to my face and gently rubbed the corner of my eye with his thumb. I met his gaze. In his eyes, I saw only my own reflection. For no reason at all, I believed him. I believed it was the truest truth. You seem to know me very well. Even better than my sister did. Yes, I know you. In this world, the only people I've spent years trying to understand are my third brother, and you. I frowned, not understanding. Years ago, you went into the palace for a banquet. On a palace passage, you met a young eunuch. You even scared off the eunuchs who were bullying him. Do you still remember what his name was? I remembered the incident, but the name was hazy. After thinking for a long time, I finally offered a name, not entirely sure. Alex? The moment the word left my mouth, I froze. That night, I had deliberately acted arrogant and domineering to drive those people away. After they ran, there shouldn't have been anyone around. So how did the crown prince know? Alexander Han. Alex. Alexander Han. Alex. I murmured the two names under my breath a few times, then blurted, "You were Alex? Do I not look like him?" A question like that was as good as an admission. He said that before the Lantern Festival banquet that year, the palace suddenly discovered someone practicing curse magic. Consort Jin fell gravely ill. In the end, it was traced to a maid from the Empress's palace accused of placing a curse. No matter how the Empress explained, the Emperor still flew into a rage. He confined her to her own palace. No one was allowed to visit. She wasn't even permitted to attend the banquet. Because of it, the crown prince also lost imperial favor. He nearly had his titles stripped, with the third prince to be installed as master of the Eastern Palace instead. It should have been a day of family reunion. Instead, mother and son were torn apart, so the crown prince quietly left the banquet and disguised himself as a eunuch from the imperial kitchens, trying to seize a chance to see the empress.